I'd love to live in a house from mycelium.
To shift from the construction sector being one of the biggest emitter of CO2 to be the biggest carbon sink.
Can mycelium solve this?
We are closer genetically to mushrooms, but mushrooms are closer to plants.
Andy Cartier. He's a mycelium expert and an accelerator of mycelium applications across various industries. Andy is the founder of Studio Cartier and head of mycelium department at C-biotech, helping turn buildings from huge carbon emitters into huge carbon sinks.
I'm just giving a medium to nature so it can be the artist. It's one of the organisms that we know the less, basically, from everything. Why we don't have mycelium everywhere yet? There's one thing, I don't know if you know about it, it's called money. And this is, the future is fungi.
I'm totally in. Quick one. This is Better Futures podcast brought to you by C-biotech and Earth Plus. We're on a mission to create the largest soil and CO2 cleanup with nature and to turn construction from a huge carbon emitter into a huge carbon sink. If you'd like to know more about our work, click on the links below and enjoy this episode. Andy, welcome. I have so many questions.
I'm ready for them.
Excellent. So first of all, please tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Andy Cartier. So I'm a French designer based before in the Netherlands for 4.5 years and now just arrived in Belgium. So basically, I'm a fungal architect, object grower, and expert, I would say, in mycelium, even if I don't like the word expert yet. But yeah, I basically found by accident, stumbled upon by accident on mycelium, and now it has been the base, the focus of most of my work. So I basically work with companies, with government, also a little bit of art on the side, just express the power of nature through the use of mycelium, basically.
So for our listeners, you said two words, fungi and mycelium. Can you explain what this is?
Okay, we go back to the roots.
Yeah.
Without any pun. So to make a similar, like a really simple, let's say comparison, the mycelium would be the root system of mushroom. So as you would have roots for an apple tree, the mycelium will be the roots, and the fungi, so the mushroom, the edible mushroom in some cases, they're actually the apple. So this is all the underground network of small roots that you don't see, but say basically as an iceberg, it's the biggest part which is underground, so the invisible part. So basically this is a network of tiny roots, tiny fibers we call hyphae. Basically these are the names, the name for the small roots, and they look underground to search for nutrients. So the particularity of mycelium, we can call it the decomposer of nature. So as I like to say, it's more like circularity personified, because this will be the degrading agent in nature. So in the soil, in the forest, they will be feeding on several type of material, on dead organism, dead matters, and they will transform it, storing also the carbon, the CO2, helping the plants with making connection with the roots of the plants underground, and making all this exchange of CO2 for nutrients and degrading the dead matters into nutriments for the soil, bringing life again. So they're the perfect image of circularity in nature, the perfect representation, in my opinion.
Wow. So let me just summarize that I understand it correctly. The mushroom itself, let's say the champignons that we buy in the shop, these are fungi.
These are, yeah. So you just call it the fruit.
The fruit.
It's the fruit of the organism, basically.
The fruit.
Yeah.
And then the roots that go on underground, this is the mycelium.
This is what we call the mycelium, exactly.
And this is what connects plants. That's why trees speak to each other.
Exactly.
Example,
So
right?
exactly, you have this experience. This I think they call it the wood wide web.
Yeah.
They get a name for it. So this idea of how those trees are able to communicate with each other. So we all know the root network of the trees are touching each other and they're all interconnected, but actually they're interconnected by the mycelium. So the mycelium is making this connection, this communication possible by being present on the surface of the roots and allowing the trees to be able to communicate together. You have this, for example, in some species of acacia trees, which can basically communicate when they get eaten by some animals. They also release spores in the air to like get to how do you say, to signal to the other trees basically that there's like some predators coming.
Yeah.
But it might also happen through the soil, through the roots. So with the mycelium. So this is also a facilitator of communication in nature, we can say.
Oh, wow. So it facilitates communication, it provides plants with the nutrients from soil, and it's also what makes our nature circular. So it
Exactly.
decomposes and it brings the nutrients for new life.
Exactly. And it's a catalyst for CO2 capture for the plants. So by basically being in some kind of symbiosis within the roots of the plants, they also enhance the capture of the carbon from the system of the plant itself by trading the nutrients and helping the trading of the nutrients underground. So they also help this, and they're carbon capture basically also.
Wow. You know, when I was a little girl, I grew up in the Arctic and we went to the boreal forest with my father and we gathered a lot of mushrooms to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So he taught me how to separate the poisonous ones from the ones you can eat.
Okay.
And I was under impression that I know quite a lot about mushrooms because I can distinguish some poisonous and non-poisonous types. But the more I learn about it, the more I hear you talk about it, the more I understand that I probably know just 0.0001% about them.
Imagine for me, it's even worse. Like I would like to think that I know a couple of things about mushroom, even if I'm not a mycologist. I'm not a trained biologist, of course, but you get to know a couple of things after working for quite a long time with mushroom and especially mycelium. But the more you know, the more you understand that actually us as a species, we almost don't know anything about mushrooms itself. So basically, this is why you probably know we have different kingdoms of how do we classify organism on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the kingdom of plants and animals, and we have the third kingdom, which is the mushroom one, which is basically we had to invented this one because we couldn't classify it as an animal nor as a plant. So basically, what it shows is that it's one of the organisms that we know the less, basically, from everything. And
Okay.
one of the fun facts is if you take the evolution, there's a certain point of time where the branch of mushroom and human split out. It's happened actually before that we split out, that the mushroom split out from plants. So actually, genetically speaking, we are closer genetically to mushrooms, that mushroom are closer to plants.
Really?
So yeah, it's so this is why there's still a huge amount of things to discover about mushroom, and this is not even going into all the benefits. So now we talked about the, let's say, ecological benefits of mushroom and their role into the ecosystem, the Earth ecosystem. But we don't talk about all the supplements, all the there is about 14,000 species of mushroom. So that's also means 14,000 species of mycelium, because every mycelium is distinct to a species. It's basically to make it clear, the mycelium has the properties that the mushroom have, not the opposite. So if you take medicinal mushroom, they're actually, at first, the properties are inside the mycelium. Psychedelic mushroom, the mycelium is first psychedelic before giving psychedelic fruit, for example. So what we know now is like we have cordyceps mushroom, which are really good for the health. Lion's mane mushroom are really good for brain cells regeneration, for example. We know all the studies now for the psilocybe cubensis, for example, so the psychedelic mushroom. We know a lot of things for depression treatment. So we start to discover more and more now all the power of mushroom, which are not only ecological, but also health. And 14,000 species, we might still discover some really crazy facts about it. So it's a work in progress, let's say.
It's a lot to learn, right?
It is a lot.
I've read as well that they discovered new antibiotics thanks to mushrooms or based on mushrooms.
Exactly. So the more basically you now, I wouldn't say it's a trend, but it's kind of a trend because also more and more European countries are open to, first, of course, psychedelic mushroom, not only for recreative use, but mostly for the health benefits and especially the mental health benefits that they can provide. And this has opened a whole new sector of. It's been like decades that we do mushroom powders of especially cordyceps mushroom. The Chinese medicine, the traditional Chinese medicine, is using reishi mushroom for I would not be precise on the time, but thousands of years, for example. So the knowledge has always been here, but now um, with this certain trend becoming now about health for people and mental health, there's a big focus and a big shift also in some industry about, okay, let's focus on mushroom. So this also is feeding the research. So there's
Yeah.
more and more funding and more research. And you have guys extremely well known now, like Paul Stamets, which is the world leader biologist, mycologist, I would say. And he used mycelium mushrooms to basically create innovation, not only for object, but he worked on patent to make, how can I explain, um, insecticide, basically,
Yeah.
but using mushrooms. So having basically developing mushroom species to kill ant colonies or other pests, basically with having not chemical, basically. So we just scratch the surface of the fungal power, let's say, the mushroom power.
Crazy, crazy.
It's fun.
How did you get into mycelium? What sparked that moment where you learned about it and thought, this is what I want to do?
It's by accident. Like I actually didn't knew anything about it, or so I was trained as a designer. So I did a school in France specialized in sustainable design, and then I moved to the Netherlands to go to the Royal Academy of Art to do more like furniture design, just to open up also a little bit my view on design. And I ended up doing an internship in Mediamatic in Amsterdam, which is a big art and design residency. So a lot of people, a lot of different small departments exploring things. And I just applied for their lab, basically. They had a small lab. And they were stopping doing mycelium. They did mycelium a couple of years before, but they stopped it. They were actually growing mycelium on their brewery waste. So they had a brewery in-house, so they were making their own beer. And
Okay.
basically they started working with mycelium to upcycle the waste of the brewery. And the project stopped for a couple of years, and now they reopened the lab at the moment I was arriving. And I thought, oh, okay, I just actually wanted to do something, just be in a lab or in a workshop doing things. And I was like, oh, natural material lab sounds interesting, sounds curiously weird, basically. And after the first week there was at the same time the person that became my mentor, basically a couple of a month later, uh, self-taught mycologist, self-taught mushroom expert, writing about mushroom when he was already like 24, so books about mushroom. And he was basically working for the Ministry of Circularity, Agriculture and Food in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of a good, I guess, really good coincidence for me, but I was really not really expected. And he was using the facilities to also make some project for the ministry or developing some samples using mycelium. And so he was also giving the knowledge to Mediamatic, to the structure, and helping the structure basically to be developed in the lab. And good connection. I think he was happy to have a young designer if I could do project for him, and he saw that I was kind of interested when he started to talk, to explain me, okay, you basically you put fibers, you mix it with this mushroom, and then you wait a week, and then basically you get a piece of material, a block of material which is similar to styrofoam but can also be tuned, and you can change the properties. And this was like, I would not say a revelation, but this was like, okay, I was really not expecting that, and this is how it started. And I always
Wait, I'm gonna pause you for a second and
okay,
ask once again, because I think you explained something really interesting. So you
okay,
take fiber, you spray something, and then you get a material in like a week. Can you walk me through that process a
yes.
bit?
So that was the next steps of course. I knew I had to explain this like much longer. So that was just to finish basically how I went into the mycelium.
Yeah.
But this was also going to be fun to explain how we were doing it at the time and how I'm doing it now. But basically, so what we explained before is that mycelium is this tiny roots, tiny networks of roots, which is looking underground for nutrients, of course. The idea was it's feeding mostly on lignocellulosic-based material. So I'm going to simplify everything, but it's mostly wood-based material. So
Okay.
this is how it can degrade this kind of material. So basically this fiber, this nutrient for the mycelium, if you give it the right food, it will spread and it will just create a denser and denser network. So what you basically see on the ground is really long roots, but you don't have a really closed matrix.
Mm-hmm.
What we do when we use it as a material is we give it the proper fibers, the best food for the species we use, and this will be contained in a mold, for example, in a box. And so basically we leave it with enough food and the right temperature, so usually above 22, 23 degrees regarding the species, and a really high level of moisture.
Mm-hmm.
So we create just the perfect environment for the mycelium to grow with absolutely no competition with other organisms, with just the food and only the mycelium, the organism we're looking for. So in order to have this, we need to sterilize or at least pasteurize our food that we give to him, because this sterilization prevents any other organism, bacteria, other fungi, because the hair, our oxygen, our hair is full of fungi, bacteria everywhere. So basically, this is why you want to sterilize the fibers. So you make them clean, and you only have your mycelium being able to develop, the one you chose, because you're going to put it into. If you do the same, if you take the food in your Tupperware and you leave it 3-4 days in the sun closed, you probably get a lot of nice colors which are not the one you want if you're going to eat it. That's
Oh yeah, yeah. I
exactly.
had containers like that. I
Exactly.
forgotten.
So this is basically what you want to avoid. If you would need to choose only one species, you would do the same, but you would just sterilize what's inside your box, and then you would leave it closed, and then you would basically only bring the species you want to develop. So this is why I was talking about sterilization and pasteurization of the fibers, which is a really mandatory step of the process of making mycelium. So you can see it kind of as a cake. So this idea of the fibers will be completely sterilized. Then you will what we call inoculate. So it's, I don't mean adding pure mycelium to it. So
Inoculate. I
inoculate,
like the word.
inoculation. We call it spawning also, because we add spawn of mycelium.
Okay.
That can be referred as like, I can simplify it. Let's say it's mycelium seeds if you want. So several companies sell mycelium under different forms. So you have what we call liquid spawning. We have grain spawn, so it's a small grain which are inoculated with mycelium that you then break down and add to your own substrate, to your own fibers. And then you have to work really clean in that sense, because you sterilize your substrate. We said that the environment is full of other bacteria, so this is why mostly you work in a lab, in some kind of laboratory environment. So you have what we call laminar flow, which are big machines that are blowing clean air, which is filtrated. So you only have clean air going on top of your substrate. You have to wear a mask, because when you speak and when you breathe, you also put this air with bacteria and other organisms on it. You clean everything with alcohol. So it's at first it might be really tricky to grow when you explain it like this. But this is why it has this scientific methodology rigor that you need to apply if you want to have successful results. And when you did all this methodology, you inoculated your fibers, then they can go into a grow room, what we call a grow room. A grow room is basically an environment at 25 degrees with 90-95% of moisture. And then, like a cake that will take really, really long, you leave it a week. Depending your final application, it would take a week, sometimes 2 weeks. It will depend what you do. If you only stay to the mycelium stage, so only having this network developing, creating a matrix, a lattice, basically denser and denser, then you're gonna take it out when you feel it's enough. And basically, to turn it into a material, you put it to dry. So putting it to dry means you take all the moisture out, because mushroom, similar to us and mycelium as well, is at least 80-85% of water. And by drying it, you also make it inert. So make it inert means killing it, killing the organism. But there's also a way to dry it without killing it. So we talked about sterilization before. It's the same when you dry it above a certain temperature, so above 70 degrees, for example, for a certain period of time. You basically will kill the mycelium, and it will not grow anymore. It will be just completely inert in that sense. But you can also slowly dry it, so just remove the moisture with regular temperature. It will take much more time. But something that has been discovered, the mycelium will go into hibernation state. So it will not die. It will just wait to have better temperature, more moisture to just continue to grow. And
Okay.
that's some data I got talking with the people from TU Delft in the
Hmm.
Netherlands. They reanimated a sample of mycelium which was dry for 8 months, and just by putting it back into a grow room with a bit more water to moisten it again, and 3 4 days later it was starting to grow again. So this is also a part that I'm really looking as one of, let's say, the axis, or one of my really strong point in the vision of the studio that I built, is this idea of stop taking from nature but start borrowing from it. So this idea of you take a material, but the whole process, the whole thinking around it, the whole ecosystem should make it work in the sense of you have zero impact from beginning to the end when you're done. So I felt the mycelium was also a much easier way to do this, because if you start with a material that can naturally degrade itself, become a fertilizer when it's degrading into nature, then you basically don't have so much to do in the end working with this such material compared to other sectors. So
Fascinating. So you met that expert in that lab,
mm.
and you realize that you can take fiber, you can inoculate it, and in 7 days you have a material made out of mycelium. And what happened then? What did you think?
so now, if I think about it, I actually now realize that it took me quite a while to understand, because um, I was showing up to the lab, and my mentor was there, and he was like, "Okay, today we're gonna sterilize this, and so we're gonna use this fiber and make this." But I think it took me like 2 or 3 months to understand, like, okay, why do we really sterilize? Like, the way we were doing it was really low tech, I can
Hmm.
say. So I had some trouble at the beginning to understand. I was like, okay, I see we do all this crazy, complicated scientific stuff. We really have to pay attention to clean our hands every time. As soon as you have one fly coming inside the lab, we had to take it out and just stop everything because it might.
Really?
Yeah, it was really like, wow, it seems super complicated. And a year later, I was growing stuff in my kitchen, so just like for fun. So I think I was a little bit at first. I was like not scared, but I was just let's say it was it seems like a huge thing to do. So I was like, oh, we need to be in the lab. I need to have the expert, and so that's why I was like, I was kind of slow to understand that. Yeah, you need to have some kind of rigor, but it's actually something anyone can do. So basically, then I started to have a couple of projects within. So within the ministry, he was leading some kind of new hub, research center that we call the Living Lab, and this was in partnership with all the agricultural and horticultural sector. So basically, because you can grow it on fibers, a lot of people are looking on one kind of waste residual flow you have as biomass that you can use to grow mycelium on.
Hmm.
So basically, these waste stream, especially from the agricultural sector, so we were working with bell pepper stems, tomato stems. These are huge, huge volumes. This is several hundred of tons of cubic meters even. And so when I started to look at this what triggers more like my designer minds of, okay, where do I look for waste? What else can we put inside? And then we had this really interesting phase of, after these 2 3 months of stop being overwhelmed by, I would say, the complexity of the process, because I was starting to really grasp it. Then started the experimental phase. So can we mix it with clay? Can we grow it on wood? Can we actually grow two blocks together? So of course, I was not the only one. I was definitely not the first one to do it. There was already some literature on it, but the literature available was just opening more my mind to what I can try. So it was really, let's say, superficial test at the
Hmm.
beginning, but this idea of being there was already not an expert in the field at all also bring you some connection that maybe expert would not think of, because at some point I think this is also one of the important thing to keep in mind. When you go too much into a sector or too much into a topic, it might also not be really positive for your creativity, because you think you know a lot of things and you kind of put barriers around the creativity. So I think this is why I was really pro-efficient at that time, because I was like, everything is possible. So then I was just try everything. And of course, a lot of things are not working. I had like a lot of infected things in my kitchen with black mold, green mold everywhere, and we even have something that is the worst. It's called we called it Agent Orange. It's an orange mold. I don't have the scientific name, but it's a small orange, a bright orange, really beautiful color. But it's powdery, and then as soon as you have it, it's spread in the air, and you have spores in your lab. And basically, if you don't clean everything during a week, you know you're gonna have more of this infection. So, but I found it really beautiful, the color. But basically, yeah, this was just to finish on that. This was the time of you mix it with everything that is passing by. Like I was really trying a lot of things, and this is what I think made me not really stay but pursue in that way. It's because I would, before going to the internship, I would never think to just open a studio, focus on one material. That was basically the opposite of what I had in mind. For me, it was I need to do a different project every week involving different material or different problematics. And now I end up working only with the same material, but tackling a lot of different problematics. So I found on the other way around, I also find something that I found interesting.
Well, technically, it's a third kingdom, not really just a material, right?
Exactly. So now we see it as a material, but being the third kingdom, we don't know what the future is made of. So that's also part of the really curious and interesting aspect.
The process of this, first doing things by the book and then the exploration part reminded me of seeing my husband in the kitchen, or like how people learn how to cook, right? First, we really followed the recipe bit by bit, gram by
Exactly.
gram, everything by the minutes, and then we become more proficient and we like just experiment. And
Exactly.
now he takes different herbs, he mixes them, he invents his own recipes, mixing different cuisine and cultures.
Exactly.
So that's what really reminded me when you told the story. And now I'm really curious, what kind of materials or what kind of things did you actually make with mycelium?
So at the time when I started to get the projects from my mentors, so this was mostly related, of course, to implement waste stream and find possible application. But mostly the first thing was before designing an application was mostly finding people interested in it. So hopefully I was in the Netherlands, which was, I would not say this is not the birth country of the mycelium, because technically the real first things done in mycelium were in the US, but this was at least the European country with the most knowledge about it and the most people willing to do things as professional with it. Because you can imagine when you start to be a young designer and you start to talk to companies and say, I can actually make something in mushroom for you, you get some reluctancy.
I
The
can
first
imagine.
question, yeah, the first question was like, when people were seeing really small samples that we made, were like, does it smell? Is it dangerous? Am I gonna die touching it? We had like a lot of really this kind of question, basically. So at first, I think the really first thing I designed was an acoustic modular system. So basically, we were growing blocks of mycelium with a certain wavy organic shape, and these blocks were made to be partition wall. So you could also just cover a wall in a room to make better acoustics, or you could also just make a partition wall to divide a room, and you had one side. They were made in wooden boxes. So to explain this a little bit, um, like I said, when you grow the mycelium, you want to grow it in shape, you grow it into a mold. So if we continue the analogy of the baking, if you want a pie, you have a circular mold. If you want a cake, you have a rectangular mold. This is basically the same. Just that the cooking time is basically what we're going to call the growing time, and instead of being an hour, it's going to be 7 days. So for someone as impatient as me, I went towards a practice which involved waiting 7 days before having results. So this is also one of the tricky part.
On the other hand, if you think in terms of construction and building materials, how long it takes to grow a tree to turn it into a wood, or
Exactly.
for fossil fuel based insulation that you need to actually extract something from the ground and put it
Exactly.
through complex processes, 7 days is really nothing.
Exactly. Especially, I think it's a really good comparison for a fossil-based product, because we tend to forget all the pre-steps before just putting in shape or making a per panel. You
Yeah.
forget all the mining and everything in
Yeah.
advance. In our case, I think the really best comparison is to say, okay, bamboo is the fastest growing plant on earth, and yet we're growing 3 times faster, technically, if
Mm-hmm.
you look at it. So for me, it's still a long time before getting results, but still on the scale of industry or even on scale of nature, this is one of the fastest growing organisms. This is something you can almost, I wouldn't say you can see it grow, but every day you see the improvement, you see the growth happening. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely, and there's a nice aspect, especially when you grow things at home or in the studio. Every morning, the first thing you go you do is to go to the grow room to check, because you
Yeah.
want to see what what happened. Did it started to grow? Did you see some change? And the 2 first day, you usually don't have anything. The 3 and 4 day are the fastest growing phases, basically. So this is the moment you start to really see. So sometimes a day before you don't really see so much mycelium, the next day it start to be almost white. So because yeah, we didn't say, but mycelium is white. So this is why all the mycelium product you see, you only see this kind of velvety, really soft white material, white beige-ish
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, and you usually don't see the fibers because it has covered uh, all the fibers. So the yeah, to continue the analogy of baking, you need a mold. Most of the mold, also like in the industry for cheap mold, you go for vacuum formed plastic mold. And we were working with this at the beginning to experiment. Also, I was going to just really cheap shop just to buy baking mold at first. You looking for plant pots or like ice tray or whatever. This kind
Mm-hmm.
of existing mold you could buy for cheap as an intern at the time. And I was starting to think that it's kind of a problem to put so much effort to work with a natural material and still having to make vacuum formed plastic mold super cheap coming from China. So it has this kind of contradiction in it. So I was starting to think, because it's growing and feeding on wood, it's also attaching with a certain strength. These tiny, tiny fibers, they actually attach to wood. So the idea with this first acoustic modules was to use the mold as a part of the design. So we laser cut it a wooden boxes with the certain shape we wanted. So the shape was designed to be reflective for the sound, for because the mycelium will be the absorption material for the
Mm-hmm.
acoustic, and the shape was to deflect basically the other sound wave which were not absorbed by the mycelium. And so by creating this frame, basically, we were just able to fill the frame, let the mycelium grow, attach to the wood, clamp everything together, and then actually we had really straight and strong sides, and we could just drill them, attach them together, and this is the first object, let's say, we did. And we presented it in the Floriade, which was it's the horticultural event in the Netherlands, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost like how do you call it? Um, it's almost like the thing that happened in Dubai recently. This huge event, which is every country has a pavilion.
World
um,
Expo.
the World Expo, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's like it's like a tiny World Expo without the country as guest, but it's one every 10 years in the Netherlands, and it
Mm-hmm.
happened basically 2 years after we created the studio. So we were lucky to be in really close contact with the government, with the Ministry of Agriculture, which had a lot of contact there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a chance to be able to present some of our project and to fill a room in the growing pavilion,
Yeah.
which basically was kind of a success for the event. So we put it there as one of the first projects. So of course this didn't went to the market directly, because it's also like one of the first projects we've done, and was a lot of things to fix if you really want to put it on the market. But this was let's say the first design I made in the studio. And speaking about this event, we also were super lucky because my mentor managed to give us an assignment also for the Floriade, but
Mm-hmm.
not for a room this time, for a plot. And the idea was, can you design an experimental bus shelter for the event? Uh,
Bus
basically
shelter.
a bus shelter.
Okay.
So at first it was supposed to be a shelter at the entrance of the event, not a bus but a boat shelter, because it was in Almere in the Netherlands. So some people could come by boat, and this was supposed to shelter the people at the entrance of the event. But we actually managed to get a plot inside the whole event, which was much nicer. And we decided to, of course, create giant mushroom of 3 meter high, 3 meter diameter, only made in mycelium and wood and fabric.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept the same approach of uh, how do you build such big parts with not having a mold. So going further away from the design of the modular acoustic block with this wooden frame, we said, what if we laser cut and design and create and laser cut a wooden skeleton, but will be actually the shape of all our giant mushroom, um, making it as a mold by wrapping it into a certain kind of fabric. We have
Mm-hmm.
several techniques to allow the mycelium to grow on fabric as well. And we divided it in parts, and we just started to grow. I would say to this day, to my knowledge, the biggest part in mycelium grown in one go, basically. And this three giant mushroom were standing 6 months outside on the plot that was called the Mycelium Park, because we shared it with the natural pavilion
Mm-hmm.
from Biobased Creation, which is a mycelium building, basically, but was already designed 3-4 years ago, before ours. But as a really young design studio, we were super happy to share the spotlight with such a nice project as the natural pavilion. Which actually, the building first where we had the first exhibition was called the Natural Pavilion. The Mycelium building was called the Growing Pavilion. I switch it. And then this was one of the this is the biggest project we ever done yet, as in terms of dimension and being 2 person designing, building, installing. That was a hell of an adventure. But we did learn a lot, and I really like this path we took of we really used the process to make it as a strength in the final product. So the skeleton, the wood was here to create the mold, but was definitely the skeleton of the structure, because the
Mm-hmm.
structure was standing by itself. But at this, we used 12 millimeters multiplex, which is not a load-bearing structural element, definitely not. But the combination of the mycelium, layer of fabric, which was kind of the skin around everything, we managed to have them stand for the 6 months of the event, and also furthermore later afterward when we got them back into the studio. They were slowly degrading outside for another 8 months under the rain, and we were harvesting the part of the substrate turning into fertilizer. We were harvesting it and put it into the small flower pot that we had in the studio.
Very cool story.
So that was fun. That was fun to do.
Andy, you're also now head of mycelium department at C-biotech, working on construction materials and the way they will revolutionize the way, how we build houses. And last time we spoke, you said that maybe our next houses will be from mycelium. Can you share a little bit more about the types of products that you're working on, the applications, and how they are different from traditional construction materials?
Sure. Yeah. So, like we mentioned before, this interest of looking for different kind of fibers, waste stream that you can integrate. Basically, like any composite, when we talk about composite, the size of the fibers, the type of fibers, they do have an impact on the properties,
Mm-hmm.
the final properties of your object.
Yeah.
So, in our case at the studio, we started to experiment with a lot of different fibers, working from different companies or different waste providers. And when I started for C-biotech, the idea is to make insulation materials, so both thermal and acoustic. And for that, you're looking into different properties. Of course, we talk about lambda value, R coefficient, but also density. And basically, this is one of the power of the material. So for now, there's of course let's say not a problem, but it's a challenge to still be as performant as old fossil fuel insulation material, because behind them there's 30-40 years of development
Yeah.
of improvement of this kind of material. So the market cannot ask for the exact same properties as soon as like as soon as the state we are right now. So basically what we do here at C-biotech is testing with different waste streams, different type of fibers, and developing here the most efficient way to make building elements, building blocks, sandwich panel, for example, using mycelium as the main insulative material. So for now, we developed a sandwich panel. We're looking into also acoustic panels and other replacement of huge volume for the building industry, and try to implement mycelium. And on the side, because we talk about composite, so one of the first proof of concept I did to, let's say, validate or not the idea of using mycelium as a replacement for especially fossil-based foam was to make a surfboard with the University of in Holland, in Alkmaar in the Netherlands. So this idea was to make a proof of concept of, can we use mycelium to replace the foam in some composite in some area, and the surfboard being not a simple object, but a simple proof of concept, and the one that basically is talking to a lot of people, was a good idea to showcase the potential of the material. And I think this is thanks to this project that actually I was contacted by C-biotech to not do surfboard, of course, but just to see the potential of this material, because EPS foam is also what can be used in the building industry, but it's also what it's used in surfboard. So you make this network of connection, because we can also push the analogy a bit further away, but even in the mycelium sector, everything is interconnected. So you can basically take knowledge from one sector, apply it to another one, and just build more knowledge about it like this. So this is how I kind of came into C-biotech to help. Basically, the wish of C-biotech is to become to shift from the construction sector being one of the biggest emitter of CO2 to be the biggest carbon sink. So I think, and I'm pretty happy we align on this vision, that mycelium will be one of the best ally we have to basically succeed in this challenge. Um, so yeah, I'm now really happy to develop a lab and factory for them to really focus really hardcore on the mycelium development.
Andy, I want to dive deeper a bit into that. So you mentioned that this is the material that is used in buildings, the foam one, fossil fuel based, traditionally for insulation. We have this huge renovation wave in Europe and globally to make buildings more energy efficient, meaning that we focus on less heating, so they don't let the heat out, right? So that's that fossil fuel based foam material that is currently used. But on the other hand, I mean, I live in a building which is very energy efficient. And in summer, once the heat is in, it's really hard to get it out, right? And I've also heard that this fossil fuel based insulation is not really so healthy to breathe in the heat waves. Can mycelium solve this? Can it make sure that we don't need to heat our buildings more, but on the other hand, that we don't need to cool them that much, that the heat leaves faster? And is it healthier to breathe?
Yeah, so definitely. So the material itself is, let's say, you could say more breathable in that sense, and especially looking to the chemical compound that you have in fossil based for the production, you don't have any in the mycelium. So you could think that because it's a mushroom, or some people refers it as a mold, you might have problem, but actually not. So the only thing there that is a problem when you work with mushroom is actually when you work with edible mushroom and you go up to the fruiting phase, you have spores. And the spores, this is why in mushroom farm they have to wear mask. But because we only grow the mycelium, we never go up to the fruiting phase. So basically we stop it before the raw production phase, so where it needs to release the spores. So because we stop before this stage, we never have the spores, so we don't have any compound or whatever released basically into the air. So there's no health impact from using mycelium. This will be, of course, better to regulate the temperature and to, if you imagine as a curve of the temperature changing over the day in your house, This will really allow to have a more steady, let's say, curve. So basically, you won't have this high rise during the summer of the temperature inside and having problem, because this will really, like you said, it's breathing. So this
Really?
it's kind of
So it's much
breathing.
better.
It's the open cell of the material. So this pose a lot of challenge as well, of course, because you're looking at this is why we went into sandwich panels. So we also enclose the mycelium into a structure that is also breathable at some point, because you want to
What is
keep.
a sandwich panel?
So a sandwich panel is just basically you have two material which are like plate material, which are one from the outside, one for the outside, one for the inside, and the mycelium is trapped in between as the insulative vial. So we have some. This is what we develop in C-biotech, and the samples that we usually send for exhibition for clients, we collect an Oreo. So because mycelium is white, you would, like an Oreo, you have a black part, first black top, which will be the external layer. You have the white, which is the mycelium, and another layer which is trapped in it. So this is why we call sandwich panel. But this will basically take both the best of both worlds. Now, why we don't have mycelium everywhere yet in our house? Why we don't build a lot of houses now already with mycelium? There's one thing, I don't know if you know about it. It's called money, and this is
No way.
this is basically the biggest. Let's say what is really not making a stop, but taking a bit more time for the mycelium world to develop, is because, like we said before, the industry of fossil-based foam is at least 40, 50 years old. So they had this half a century to develop, optimize, and cut down the cost. Our industry is a baby. So basically, there is not so much company in the world which there is no company which can produce as much as one of the largest actor in fossil base yet, and there's not as many companies doing this. So basically, we're still in this, I would not say baby, but teenage phase of the material, where more and more things are happening, and more companies are driving into it, and more designers and architects are using it as a material. Uh, More and more people are finding about it, basically. But now we're still not reaching the scale of how this fossil-based material are developed and established. So you can't ask to such a young industry to be as competitive as did really old one, for example. So this is why it will still take a little bit of time, but this is why we need more and more pioneer industry, what we can call pioneer, if you want to make a nice pun.
Nice.
But basically, yeah, this is just a matter of time before we just become as competitive, not only in terms of performance, but in terms of cost. And as we know, cost is ruling basically the economics. So the biggest development now for Mycelium would not necessarily to focus on the performance at first, but really on the process and how to produce it cheaper, how to include more waste, because this is something you cannot do with EPS, per, or this kind of material. You cannot produce them with waste. You actually create, you have a harmful and for the environment process to making it, and the end of life is also really bad.
And CO2 emissions are
And CO2
probably
emission above
a lot
everything,
more.
include in everything,
Yeah.
is terrible. Now we have a material which we can mix with plant-based fibers. We know plants are storing carbon. We know some plants are much better at storing CO2 than others. So by selecting, choosing the right fibers, we can have a certain impact, which is actually storing more carbon, even if you take into account the whole production and the energy consumption for, as we said, non-optimized, non-super efficient production process yet. You still can have net zero material, and in the next years you will have a completely positive impact, starting from the sourcing the material to the end life of your product. You would have a positive impact, storing more carbon than you produce. So this is just asking now more people trusting it, more funding, more companies, more initiative just going into it, and this will happen. So for me, I do this small comparison sometimes. It's imagine you would be now in the 40s and the 50s, and you start to leave the plastic revolution. So we start to get it. You have it in the most obvious application. So let's say packaging is one of the most, because it's a really good replacement as styrofoam, and it looks like styrofoam basically. So one of the best ideas was to replace this single-use material into natural ones. But like plastic started for a couple of things, and 10 years later, every industry was using plastic at some point. And I really believe that we're leaving now since 2010, 2015. We're just entering the mushroom era, and we just left the plastic era, basically. So this is how I'm seeing things. And whatever happens, whatever other challenge we might face in the future is fungi.
The mushroom era.
The
I
mushroom era.
like that. I like that. I mean, seems like a no-brainer. It's and I think when you said the costs are important, I mean, how much more expensive now mycelium products are comparing to fossil fuel based?
So it will depend. You would need to take a specific case, of course,
Yeah,
but basically it would really depend how you're looking at it, not only for retail price,
yeah,
because it's what we look a lot here is also LCA, and then the price is part of something, but when you look at overall impact, LCA also does give a cost of impact, basically.
yeah. Which is
And
LCA is a life cycle assessment from the start of the production until the
exactly.
end of life of the product.
And basically, if you look at this, you can basically divide by 10 or 20 the total cost of production, including environmental cost,
Mm-hmm.
compared to other fossil-based material, which will not be represented yet into the retail cost because facilities, scale of production, as we just discussed before, cannot be as competitive yet. But right now, for example, for insulation material, if you want to compare with similar performance and similar price, you would be for mycelium in solution. We would be in the range of rock wool, for example.
Okay, so
So
it's
this
already
is
comparable
exactly
on a
you're
smaller scale versus large scale production.
exactly already,
Yeah.
and then of course you're much more expensive than EPS or PU based material. You're maybe 2 times more expensive now, and there's a couple of properties you cannot meet in terms of lambda value because these materials, like we said, are really developed for a really long time, and they have a
What is
really
EPS and PU based?
sorry.
EPS and PU based materials. What's that?
So EPS is expanded polystyrene.
Okay.
PU is polyurethane based.
Okay.
Um, but this is like the main material used in PU foam is for example, the foaming, the spray that you use to seal windows. This kind of material
Mhm.
which are quick to set up. They expand it, so they get a lot of air bubbles. So this is why they have really good, really low lambda values, so really good insulation properties. But with all the problem that we know and we just explained. So, but also, like we said, 14,000 species of mycelium. We maybe there's 10 to 15 used in the industry because, of course, a lot of research has been done, and you look for the strength of the mycelium bond of the fibers. You look for other properties, but who knows what mushroom is growing now in the Amazon forest and might have the best property we want to do. So this is also why I'm also encouraging more mycologists, biologists, also governments, institution to also just go for more expedition, mushroom expedition, because we might discover also new species not only for health benefit but also for the building sector or even for other application. So this is why I'm always confident. I don't know any new technology that just came out and was as good, as performant as what it was replacing. If you take the horses and the car, the first car was much slower than the horses and probably much more expensive. This we still run cars now, so I see it like this juvenile period of the development of the mycelium era.
Well, if you ask me, I would prefer to have a house with mycelium insulation, which I can be sure that in heat waves I can breathe better air that would not be contaminated with chemicals, that also will not store the heat inside,
Mm-hmm.
especially with climate change now. The heat is rising, right? And the cooling costs are rising. And sometimes with the heat, that can impact the grid, right? And the electricity can shut down. I would prefer to live in a house that can stand heat waves, and I
Exactly.
wouldn't need to right now wake up in heat waves every morning at 6 a.m. to open all the windows open, and still, it doesn't help
Exactly.
much. And if mycelium can solve that problem, that means that we have to look not just at the cost of the material to purchase, but over the lifetime,
Exactly.
how much energy costs would
You
I
save.
use to maintain the building?
Exactly.
And that would be a big saving for mycelium too, right? Plus, it's natural, can be used afterwards and recycled after the building is done. I don't see why we wouldn't go for mycelium
No,
as a
exactly.
replacement.
And exactly, and it's this idea of regenerative material.
Yeah,
So you're taking something from nature, but this is nothing like animal cattle or whatever. This is something that will just continue to spread, and you. This is so regenerative that it's actually I would not say unlimited resources, because of course you still have the energy to grow it, to dry it, but also a lot of improvement can be done here. And this is also what we work at C-biotech. It's also focusing on the energy impact. But as you said, for now, the not optimized process are already really good. But if you take into account the whole LCA, basing also on the energy you're going to save compared to old-based material, then you get a much cheaper value if you look on the long run.
yeah.
So this is why it's promising, and it's not even, I would say, not even promising, because promising would let you think that we'll try everything. No, this is gonna happen. At least in my opinion, this is gonna happen. Now we just need to perfect it.
I'm totally in.
Yeah,
I'd love to live in a house from mycelium.
it will come. It will come. There's already building existing. There's already a couple of project investing in this. But the next step is making it off the shelf ready. But that's what we're working on.
Indeed. And what about art? You also said that you're working not just on construction materials, but also mycelium art.
Not really consider myself as an artist, because I think it's another completely another dedication. But by exploring a couple of years before, by testing different things, working with the wood, the fabric, um, we basically found a really small trick to have the mycelium grow through the fabric. Because even if you use natural fibers, you want an homogeneous growth of all the tiny fibers. You want them to go through the cells, the open cells of the textile, and basically grab it. So we developed a small technique, and at some point we figured out that if you leave it grow on certain condition and for a really long time, the mycelium would start to look for oxygen to fruit. So basically to give the mushroom, the edible mushroom, well, not edible, but the fruit. So basically, depending the species you use, the mycelium is always white, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look for pink oyster mushroom, definitely pink. You also have oyster, which are yellow. You have every color almost made by mushroom. You also have bioluminescent mushrooms. So the thing is, when you start to fruit, in nature, it will just fruit where it found oxygen, and it will fruit with stems. So basically, you would create the stems, and then the caps, and then the mushroom are growing like this. In our case, we developed a special technique to basically make it grow, but not with stems. So because we control the oxygen and the CO2 level, it doesn't really know where to really pop a mushroom. So it's growing, it's starting to fruit on the surface, but on really just a small layer. So basically what meanings by fruiting, changing color and developing the mycelium that's forming that will then become a fruit. And we work with Ganoderma resinaceum, which is the reishi mushroom, so the traditional the Chinese medicine one. And it has some kind of a gradient from almost bright orange turning to reddish brown and some beige. And so basically with our small process, we basically create this, we call it natural painting. And this idea of having this piece of fabric which is colonized on some part, because we use special technique to leave it grow on some part. Some are not that much grown, so it's more like the white of the mycelium. And we create stain, but we don't really create anything. So this is why I'm saying I'm not an artist. I'm just giving a medium to nature so it can be the artist. So then this is the best way to do it, because I'm not saying I'm a really bad painter, I'm a really bad drawer. So basically, if I can have someone else do the job, especially if it's nature, that was even better. So we just have this technique of inoculating a piece of fabric. We leave it grow for a couple of weeks, almost a month sometimes. We stretch it off and we stretch it back onto a frame, and you have a mycelium painting. And we did a couple of exhibition on this, and that's always fun. And it's always fun to we try to minimize the intervention. So we had to develop a certain way to control the oxygen in the CO2. But basically, once it's done, we leave it for 2 weeks and then we come back to see how it looks like. And we never know what to expect. So, and we take it as it is. So I don't want to, okay, I want a brown or orange stain here, or I want this. No, actually, I just wanted to see what nature is gonna give. And the next steps, which will be in a couple of weeks, is I'm testing new species now to try to get new colors.
I like it how you give it way to nature to do its work or to paint a beautiful picture. And that's why I'd like to ask you a closing question. Andy, are you hopeful for the future of nature and sustainability?
Yeah, you have to. If you're not, what's the point to do things? So I might be. People might call me too optimistic, but if you don't bring this kind of energy, you don't propel yourself to do the change. And even though you're in the wrong, and people watch are more pessimistic, think it's not worth it. I also have this, not saying, but I have this thing of, in case I was wrong, I did it with honor in that sense. So I tried until the last moment, and I don't think we should be scared or anxious. I think we should just try until we're sure it's not going to work, and because we're probably not never going to get this answer. Uh, I think let's just go for it and also have fun along the way, because it's not because we have huge problematics or huge challenges that we shouldn't just also have fun along the way fixing it.
I agree. I think historically, we wait until the last moment until the problems arise, and then we rise to the challenge to solve it. And we could be pessimistic if there were no solutions, absolutely. But like you showed us today, you can do so much with just mycelium and solve so many
With
issues.
just mushroom.
Yeah, with just mushrooms, turning buildings into carbon sinks, making them healthier to breathe, eliminating the need of mining
Exactly.
the materials. Um, Andy, thank you.
Thanks
You
to you for having me. It was fun.
you really made me fall in love with the third kingdom. You really opened my eyes
Mushroom
on
love.
the power on the power of mushrooms and mycelium, and what they can do in the applications that they can bring, and the way they make nature circular, which I think
Mm.
should be an inspiration for all of us in terms
Yeah.
of circularity and how we can live in a planet with limited resources by implementing circular models and learning from nature. So thank you so much. This was an amazing
Thanks to you.
conversation.
That was a pleasure, and fungal love.
Fungal love.